The Fountain of Friendship at the entrance to the Moscow Exhibition Complex. Female figures wearing the national costumes of the peoples of the USSR. Symbols of unity inside the Soviet state. Stalinist art, socialist realism. The University of Moscow, set up during the final years of the Red Dictator, one of 7 massive Stalinist buildings which continue to dominate the city skyline up until the present day. Monumental building projects like those found in metropolitan America, a combination of skyscraper and cathedral, the Soviet Union emerges as a superpower alongside the United States. But before it does, the country faces the hardest test of survival in its history. August 23, 1939, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop flies to Moscow. Following fruitless talks with Britain and France, Stalin wants to end his country's international isolation. He refers to the USSR as an island in a sea of capitalist states. The world holds its breath as Foreign Ministers Molotov and von Ribbentrop conclude a treaty on behalf of their leaders, Stalin and Hitler, who are sworn enemies of each other. Stalin appears relieved at the signing ceremony. He says he wants to forget that in the past the two countries, in his phrase, poured buckets of swill on each other. This non-aggression pact contained a number of secret protocols, including the partition of Poland and the Baltic states. Stalin celebrated this act of German-Soviet friendship with a toast to Hitler, though Stalin would eventually refer to the treaty as a pact with the devil. Stalin told his guests, "I know how much the German people love their leader, so I want to drink to his health." With thick lines, Stalin helped draw spheres of influence. September 1939. Without declaring war, the German Wehrmacht attacks Poland. After 6 weeks, the Polish army capitulates. The German word blitzkrieg enters the languages of all nations. At first, Stalin hesitates to take his piece of the Polish pie. Only once the Germans have surrounded Warsaw does Stalin give the order for the Red Army to enter eastern Poland. Stalin sends Hitler a telegram of congratulations after the Germans take Warsaw. The Wehrmacht and the Red Army meet on the River Bug, the new border of their spheres of influence. Parts of the Polish army fall to the Soviets. Officers are detained at camps inside Russia and Ukraine. Many inside the newly captured territories regard the Red Army as liberators. 2/3 of eastern Poland's populations are Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Jews. But the soldiers are accompanied by the NKVD, Stalin's secret police. Those seen as opponents of the Soviet regime are sent to prison camps or labor camps. Executions by firing squad become routine. Until the early summer of 1941, the German ambassador, Graf Schulenberg, and the Soviet foreign minister, Molotov, sign a series of agreements. These resolve a series of border issues. For a few $1 million, the Germans hand over territory to Stalin. The Soviet Union has bled white through the Great Terror. The people are exhausted. Thousands of desperately needed experts and specialists sit in labor camps. The Red Army is missing the commanders whom Stalin ordered shot. May 1941, a deceptive calm. The People's Commissar for Defense, Marshal Timoshenko, warns of war.
Comrade soldiers, sailors, flyers, commanders, political workers, collective farmers and intelligentsia. I congratulate you on the International Day of the Proletariat, May the 1st.
1 мая. Товарищи, в этом году
Comrades, this year workers in our country and around the world celebrate this holiday in the shadow of an extraordinarily difficult situation.
в исключительно сложной международной обстановке.
At the same time, Stalin is brooding. He is aware of the danger of war, yet he denies it. He ignores his generals' warnings. The people continue to believe Stalin more than the ominous signs of the coming conflict.
Сформировался такой стереотип взгляда.
There was the following cliché about Stalin, that he was a genius, a leader of people who knew everything and never made mistakes. This was the case before the war, but when people began to sense that Stalin had made an error, that in a few hours the war would start, that was when Stalin's own personal view was, if I don't want it, there will not be a war. He told everyone that war would be prevented, but it was not to be. Stalin became a god on earth. This transformation turned the majority of people into one huge grey amorphic mass in which personalities dissolved, where individual personalities no longer existed. There was the leader and there were the masses. It was a horrible situation. People believed Stalin because they fanatically believed in him, not for truth or reason, but because of a fanatical blind faith. I would go so far as to say that Stalinism was a kind of world religion. Decades have passed since that time, but the after effects of this religion continue to be felt until the present day.
June 22nd, 1941, the Black Night of the fascist invasion begins. The German Wehrmacht attacks the Soviet Union. On the first day of the war, the Soviet Air Force loses 1,200 aircraft, most of which are destroyed on the ground by the Germans. Stalin orders the military to smash the enemy. This was a completely unrealistic assessment of the situation. Stalin refused to address the Soviet people, a job left up to Molotov. Stalin stayed out of public view. For days, he is not to be spoken to. He could not comprehend the devastating losses during the first days of the war. His authority was not supposed to be shaken. German troops were seen by some as liberators of the Soviet yoke, for example, in Lithuania. Yet those who welcomed the Germans would soon come to regret it. The Wehrmacht was followed by troops of the Nazi SS. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were killed in the opening days of the war. Millions of others were taken prisoner. Many were never to be seen again. Stalin's purge of the officer corps led to bitter results on the battlefield. No one was spared. It was total war from the beginning. Finally, on July 3rd, Stalin spoke to the Soviet people.
Граждане, братья и сестры, бойцы нашей
Comrades, citizens, brothers and sisters, fighters of the Army and Navy, my friends, I appeal to you. The heinous attack by Hitler's Germany continues. What has fascist Germany achieved by breaking the pact and attacking the USSR? Its troops have achieved an advantageous situation, but politically they have lost, because they have revealed themselves to the world to be bloodthirsty aggressors.
В течение короткого срока, но она проиграла политически, озадачив себя в глазах всего мира как кровавого агрессора.
The Soviet power desperately tries to defend itself. Everywhere, volunteers sign up. Jewish Soviet citizens are evacuated from western areas to the east. The Volga Germans are deported from their region because Stalin fears they will cooperate with the Wehrmacht. The history of this deportation is an especially tragic chapter in the Stalinist policies of what the Soviets called the Great Fatherland War. Hundreds of thousands of well-armed NKVD men who were needed on the front instead had to carry out these forced deportations. Within a few months, and with great difficulty, the Soviet regime was able to shift industrial production sites from the west to points further east. 1,500 factories were relocated to the Volga region, the Urals, to Siberia, Kazakhstan, and to other parts of Central Asia. This effort required millions of rail cars. Leningrad's most important munitions plant was transported with great sacrifice across Lake Ladoga. The relocated facilities were integrated with existing factories behind the Volga. Former motor and arms plants from Leningrad and Charkov were merged with Siberian tractor factories to create the huge Tankograd factory, which supplied tanks to the front. In the fall of 1941, the Wehrmacht sent 1 million men to attack the capital. The government and administration left Moscow. Stalin remained in the Kremlin. The Germans stood at the gates of the city. The Soviet leadership marked the 24th anniversary of the October Revolution, which featured a speech by Stalin.
Comrades, soldiers, sailors of the Red Fleet, commanders, political workers, and partisans. People all over Europe who have fallen under the tyranny of Germany see you as their liberators. You have the honor of being part of this liberating mission. Prove that you are worthy of this task. Let our ancestors be an inspiration to you. Alexander Nevsky, Dmitry Poyarsky, Alexander Suvorov, Mikhail Kutuzov. Let us do this under the unvanquishable banner of the great Lenin. Destroy the German invaders. Death to the occupiers. Long live our homeland, its freedom and independence. Under the banner of Lenin, forward to victory.
Patriotic films are used to remind the Russians of past victories. Stalin, the military layman, sees himself following in the footsteps of Russian history's great military leaders. On December 6, 1941, Stalin issues the order for a major counteroffensive. The Battle of Moscow gives the German Wehrmacht its first taste of the catastrophe to come. August 1942, Britain's wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill visits Stalin. Churchill, who once called Bolshevism a plague deserving liquidation, is now an ally of the Red Dictator. The economically powerful United States is also an ally in the anti-Hitler coalition. Supplies from the USA help bolster the resistance of the Red Army. Without this help, the Soviets would not have been able to turn back the German attackers so quickly. But the vehicles and weapons from the West also help the British and Americans, as the Red Army bears most of the burden in the war against the Germans. The Soviet regime mobilizes all of the country's resources for the war effort. Leaving one's place of work without permission is considered an act of treason. Those caught doing so must appear before a military tribunal. Workers more or less voluntarily donate portions of their meager wages to the war effort. October 1942, the Soviets marked the 25th anniversary of the revolution. To avoid German air raids, celebrations are held in a Moscow subway station. The German army is in the Caucasus and on the Volga. Since the outbreak of the war, Stalin is the head of government and commander of the armed forces, as well as Secretary General of the Communist Party. As a military commander, he makes grave mistakes. Strategic decisions are made using a globe on his desk. The generals are outraged. The Red Army stumbles from one crisis to the next. Stalin addresses the leaders of the party, the state, and the army.
Товарищи, прошло 24 года.
Comrades, 24 years have gone by since the victorious Great Socialist October Revolution, which marked the beginning of the construction of Soviet society. We stand at the door of the 25th year of Soviet leadership. The war has extremely restricted our peaceful work and has forced its suspension in some areas. It has also forced us to concentrate all of our energies on the war effort. Behind the lines, the entire country is working for the Red Army and the fleet. The period of peaceful construction has come to an end. The period of fighting the German conqueror has begun. At the start of their attack, the invaders believed they would conquer the Soviet Union in a couple of months, during which they would reach the Urals. It has to be said, the German plan for their blitzkrieg was not a secret. In fact, they made this plan public whenever possible. But facts on the ground have shown the senselessness and recklessness of this plan. It can now be said this foolish plan has failed.
In the summer of 1942, the Wehrmacht launches their last major offensive in the east. The goal of the offensive, led by the tanks of the 6th Army, is to capture Stalin's namesake city, Stalingrad. The battle for Stalingrad is long and bitter and goes on for 6 months. Afterwards, the industrial city on the Volga is left in ruins. The German 6th Army is decimated. 330,000 men are killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. One Soviet soldier writes home from the front, "Now it's over. Fritz is kaput." A half year later, the Soviet army begins its march to victory. June 22, 1944, the Red Army launches a final battle to liberate Soviet territory, exactly 3 years to the day that the Germans launched their invasion. Stalin placed great symbolic importance on such anniversaries. 2,400,000 Red Army troops take part in the summer offensive on the Dnieper. The offensive was planned in conjunction with the Allied invasion of France. This time, Hitler cannot relocate troops from the Western Front. The German Wehrmacht suffers its worst defeat on the Eastern Front. As they withdraw, the German army destroys everything that has not already been destroyed. In taking back territory, Soviet troops near Smolensk come across Katyn. After the defeat of Poland, 26,000 Polish officers and accused counter-revolutionaries were detained near Katyn and other places. Their fate led to an international dispute during the war. The fact is that 22,000 Poles were summarily shot and killed. Stalin set up an investigative commission. This included senior members of the Russian Orthodox Church, as well as the writer Alexei Tolstoy. This commission came to the conclusion that the Polish officers had been murdered by the Germans. A year previously, an international commission requested by the Germans declared that the atrocity had been carried out by the Russians. For decades, Katyn was an obstacle in Soviet-Polish ties. None of Stalin's successors, including Mikhail Gorbachev, ever admitted the crimes against the Polish officers had been carried out by Stalin's secret police. For 40 years, they kept the truth from both world opinion and their Polish allies. The People's Commission for Internal Affairs, a document with the simple name Package Number 1, is sent to Comrade Stalin. Completed on March 5, 1940, it is a list of the captured Poles who were executed. It is signed by Lavrentiy Beria, the head of Stalin's secret police, who planned this act of mass murder. Written in pencil, it has the approval of Stalin, Voroshilov, Molotov, Mikoyan, Kalinin, and Kaganovich. Nikita Khrushchev looked at the file on April 15, 1959, as did Yuri Andropov on April 15, 1981. Mikhail Gorbachev's chief of staff, Boldin, saw it on April 18, 1989.
Товарищи, советский народ и Красная Армия успешно осуществляют задачи.
Comrades, the Soviet people and the Red Army are successfully meeting the challenges posed to them through the war for the fatherland. The Red Army carried out its patriotic duty and liberated the country from the enemy. Now and forever, we have been liberated from Nazi atrocities. Now, the Red Army has a final mission to carry out, with the help of our allies, to destroy the fascist German army, to kill the fascist beast in its own cave, and to raise the flag of victory over Berlin.
Фашистского зверя в ее собственном логове и водрузит над Берлином знамя победы.
In the second half of 1944, the Red Army launches an offensive in the Balkans. Within a month, both Bulgaria and Romania were overrun. The Soviets were welcomed and Stalin was cheered. But Stalin did not plan to bring freedom to the countries of Eastern Europe. He said, "This war is different from those of the past. Whoever occupies an area may impose their own social system there. Each side can bring its own system to those territories which it conquers. It cannot be otherwise." Only Yugoslavia, under the legendary partisan leader Josip Broz Tito, manages to liberate itself. On the same day in 1944, Belgrade was entered by both the Red Army unit and Tito's partisan army. A brotherly kiss seals the separately fought but joint victory over the German fascists. This unique situation enhanced Tito's image, including in Moscow. But when Tito insists on maintaining Yugoslavia's national integrity in 1948, Stalin then brands him a Nazi and a Trotskyist and accuses Tito of murder and sabotage. Yalta on the Crimea. In early February of 1945, Yalta hosts the meeting of the Big Three: Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. The photo opportunity fails to capture the tensions between the three leaders over the fruits of their wartime victory, specifically the fate of Germany and the future of Eastern Europe. Stalin says he will not tolerate any interference by the Western powers into this region. Above all, he wants to control Poland. The West stands by as Stalin creates facts on the ground in both Eastern Europe and Eastern Germany. The Red Army marches on despite heavy resistance. In early April of 1945, the Red Army occupies the Hungarian capital Budapest. With that, Stalin now has almost all of southeastern Europe under his control. As the tanks of the Red Army roll into Vienna, the first Soviet troops enter German territory. Königsberg, the capital of East Prussia, falls on April 9. 2 weeks later, a Katyushka rocket has the message, "To the Reichstag," painted on it. Before the Battle of Berlin, the poet Ilya Ehrenberg wrote, "Germany, it is too late. You can only turn and twist in this battle to the death. The hour for vengeance has arrived." Berlin falls on May 2nd, 1945. A week later, the war in Europe is over. Victory is engraved on this medal, which Stalin has had especially designed for this occasion. The first one, of course, goes to the Generalissimo, Stalin's latest title. Stalin calls the Russians the heroic people of the Soviet Union. The summer of 1945, all of Berlin is under Soviet control. 4 years earlier, on the day the Germans attacked Russia, Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary, "The breath of history can be heard, a great and wonderful time when a new empire is born. Despite some pain and suffering, it continues to rise towards the light." At the end of April, Stalin has a group of German communists known as the Ulbricht Group flown from Moscow to Berlin. Their activities as propagandists begin immediately. Posters with Stalin's picture and statements are put up. These state things such as, "History shows that Hitler's come and go, but the German state and German people remain." The Ulbricht Group's mission is to ensure that the reins of power in Germany stay in Soviet hands. The Potsdam Conference opens on July 17, 1945. Churchill is there, as is Truman, the new American president. It was at this meeting that Stalin reached his pinnacle of international recognition. The differences between these unequal allies flare up again at the negotiating table. Stalin fears a resurgent Germany. He plans to prevent this through harsh peace terms. The Western powers contradict this. The Cold War looms on the horizon. Stalin thinks he's being toyed with at the Potsdam Conference. Stalin complains the Russians may be a simple people, but all too often the West has assumed they are fools. One day before the Potsdam Conference, the Americans test their first atomic bomb. Stalin immediately orders his secret police chief, Beria, to speed up development of a Soviet nuclear bomb, whatever the cost. This goal is reached in 1949 when the Soviet Union joins the United States as the world's only nuclear powers. This marks the start of the Soviet Union's rise as a superpower to rival American influence around the globe. Following victory, the Soviet Union tallies up its losses. 20 million dead, 25 million homeless, 680 billion rubles in damages, 17,000 cities and 70,000 towns and villages are destroyed. No other country has ever suffered as much during a war. Offers of aid from the West are rebuffed. Stalinism survives its harshest test, but at a very high price. The country is shattered and the people are exhausted. People are living in caves, in holes in the ground, and in open fields. The accomplishments of an entire generation have been completely destroyed. Help is once again needed to clear away the damage. Young people from all over the Soviet Union flock to help rebuild the destroyed Western republics of the USSR. Many hope that life will become better. The people have proven their patriotism through their suffering and sacrifice in the Great War for the fatherland, but hopes for a better life fade rapidly. Artist collectives, which a few months previously had painted portraits of soldiers or heroes of the front, now painted heroes of the Reconstruction. Focus is given to rebuilding industry, which reached pre-war levels in 1948. But no fresh winds blow through Soviet society after the end of the war.
Действительно, после Второй мировой войны
After the end of the Second World War, it appeared as if much of this vast country was at a standstill. Of course, they rebuilt what had been destroyed. New factories and hydroelectric plants, new atom bombs were tested, and work on the space program was launched. But everything appeared to be standing still from a social and spiritual point of view. Why? It had been 30 years since the October Putsch. In these 3 decades, a new generation was formed, which followed the regime and the party, who had been drilled to cheer and praise the party. It was a generation that was easily manipulated. That's one of the reasons.
Это во-первых. Во-вторых, это затишье перед концом смерти, перед концом жизни диктатора.
Secondly, this sense of stagnation just prior to Stalin's death can be explained by the fact that Stalin had eliminated all potential opponents. There was hardly anyone left to challenge him.
Не осталось ни одного видного человека, который мог бы бросить вызов, который мог бы возвысить голос, который мог бы что-то сказать.
Thirdly, there was the feeling that the situation could not be this stagnant forever.
Исторически предчувствуя, что так вечно продолжаться не может. И когда умер Сталин, даже его все бонзы...
After Stalin died, even his yes men, people like Khrushchev, Beria, Malenkov, Molotov, and the other leaders realized that something had to change, that they could now blame Stalin for everything which had gone wrong.
Свалить все на Сталина, обвинить Сталина во всем этом.
Even New Year's was dominated by the tradition of praising Stalin.
Let's drink to new historic deeds, to our homeland, to peace, and to our great Stalin.
To an even bigger, greater harvest, to our collective, to Stalin. To that apostle of peace, the dearest person on the planet, Comrade Stalin.
In the post-war era, he was praised and celebrated to unprecedented levels. Cities, villages, streets, squares, ships, schools, factories, and collectives were named after him. Monuments portrayed him as an uber-father figure, strict but fair, good and godlike. The sculptor and Stalin Award winner Zair Isakovich Asgur created these monuments.
Когда уже Сталин был Сталин, когда он стал любимым народом всем.
At that time, Stalin was loved by everyone. We began to work with Vucetich on the figure of Stalin. I was given the job because a commission called by Patolichev liked my Stalin better. It was this figure here, right where I'm sitting. First, the model was made, and then it was cast to the desired scale.
A newsreel shows the young Asgur at work and his contribution to the cult of the leader. The dedication of Asgur's Stalin monument, cast in bronze and 12 meters high. It was to be raised on the main plaza in the Belarusian capital Minsk, Stalin Square, which was right next to the city's busiest street, Stalin Prospect. Belarusian party leaders and hundreds of thousands of others came to pay tribute to their leader. The writer Leonid Leonov once wrote, "The day will come when all of humanity will praise Stalin, and historians will recognize that our calendar should be based on the birth of Stalin and not Jesus Christ." The election to the Supreme Soviet approaches.
Our whole lives, all of our accomplishments, and all of our victories have been linked to the name of our dear comrade Stalin. I propose nominating our genial leader, friend and teacher, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, as a candidate to the Supreme Soviet of the USSR.
Stalin was called on to be a candidate and agreed to the proposal. The entire workforce was expected to swear their allegiance to Stalin.
Comrades, it is with great joy and pride that we vote for Stalin, because he is peace and victory. Under Stalin's name, the Soviet people will be victorious through peaceful work in the factories and the collectives. In Stalin's name, we will construct the great building of communism.
After these words, there was nothing left to do but agree. Once again, Stalin had scored a victory.
People often say, okay, Stalin was a dictator. He was a terrible person who led us into a historical catastrophe. But millions of people followed him. Millions supported him. Millions believed in him and would even say they loved him. Why? Me, for example, I was a Stalinist when I was a young lieutenant, and that was at the time when my father had been executed and my mother sent into exile where she died. I don't know why. I guess I hoped that it was a misunderstanding and that Stalin had no involvement. Basically, the whole country believed in Stalin. What was the origin of this blind fanatical faith? Lenin and Stalin both told the people they would have to be patient and frugal, but that in 10 to 15 years that paradise, in the form of a bright communist future, would arrive. It's right there, behind this mountain. Before one can reach paradise, enemies must be destroyed. Be merciless, work very, very hard, spy on one another and be vigilant. Spies are everywhere, enemies are everywhere, and Stalin thought for all of us. Stalin is wise, Stalin knows everything.
И Сталин думает за нас всех. Сталин мудрый, Сталин все знает.
Election Day. The Supreme Soviet is the highest-ranking body in the USSR. Its chairman is also the head of state. According to the Constitution, Stalin himself was never head of state. He ruled alongside and above state institutions, although he never dismantled them. On paper, the Soviet Union was not a dictatorship. All citizens had the right to cast a direct and secret ballot, only there was nothing to vote for. Stalin never attended university, yet in his final years he began to consider himself to be a theorist. He assigned experts to write books which were then published under Stalin's name. And of course, Stalin was the favorite subject of all Soviet artists. Stalin with his mother, Stalin as a friend of Lenin's, and even more frequently, Stalin as a military field commander. There were no exhibitions in which Stalin was not at the center of attention. He was to be thanked for everything, including the Soviet atomic bomb, as described in a song performed by a Red Army choir.
Comrade Stalin announced that we will test an atom bomb, now and in the future and evermore. The atom bombs will be, the atom bombs are. One has to protect oneself. We don't plan to destroy others. The bombs should be banned, because only the peaceful atom brings happiness into the home. You only want to ban others from building a bomb. The bomb should only serve your interests and bandits. Hey, hey, your plans are full of lies. That must be told to the people. We are satisfied with our work. Our atom bomb is a good thing, a jewel of a bomb which was only tried once. Oh, go, go, we haven't been lazy, we've worked hard for the good of the people.
The people took care of themselves as best they could. Since there was no place in public life which was off limits from Stalin's party and the police, many Soviet citizens sought refuge in their private lives. Many sought refuge in nature, snow, sun, sport, and play. A fire to sing some old Russian songs around, and if one was lucky, with a bottle of vodka. To rest until a little before things tensed up again. Stalin's 70th birthday, activities are underway all over the USSR to mark the Jubilee. People are expected to write poems, to organize and prepare events, and to make handicrafts to honor the great leader, including one portrait made out of 150,000 pieces of wood. The birthday marks a new milestone in the leader's cult of personality.
Our dear father, accept from us, the Belarusian pioneers, our warmest greetings on your 70th Jubilee. We Soviet children are the happiest in the entire world. We grow up under your watchful and tireless care, warmed by your fatherly love. We can live in such a beautiful and happy atmosphere because on our earth is our great and wonderful Stalin. To the great Stalin, glory, glory, glory.
The main event took place in the Bolshoi Theater. Statesmen from all over the socialist world were there, including Mao Zedong and, naturally, Walter Ulbricht. Stalin had exported his system and its ingredients throughout Eastern Europe. The cult of personality, show trials, labor camps, even Stalinist architecture such as the Palace of Culture in Warsaw. Heavy industry was built in the people's democracies on the Soviet model. When the 34th anniversary of the October Revolution was celebrated, nothing appeared to be able to move the Soviet system. The Iron Curtain sharply divided the East from the West. Inside the USSR, state terror was once again raising its head. The death penalty was reintroduced, leading functionaries were executed, and a wave of purges swept through Eastern Europe's communist parties. Fears of massive repression were widespread. The masses usually only saw Stalin in his oversized pictures. The man himself avoided public appearances. Behind his back, the power struggle was on for his successor. In 1951, Stalin was missing from the traditional parade to mark the anniversary of the revolution, but no one dared take his place. The legendary Man of Steel lived on as an old and ghostly figure.
И очень следил последние годы за здоровьем. Мало кто знает, что в 50-м...
In his final years, he took great care of his health. Few people knew that starting in 1950 he would travel to the warmer climate of the southern USSR every August and would remain there for 3 or 4 months until the new year. Everyone thought he was in Moscow. Often, one could see him lying on a chair on the beach. Of course, he was surrounded by bodyguards, but they were out of sight. He would sit in his chaise lounge with a coat on and spend hours staring at the sea.
Он просто думал, как много он добился. Что на этими горами, где он сидел на Кавказе,
He was certainly thinking about the path his life had taken, that he grew up in these same Caucasus mountains and almost became a priest, and that if he had, he might be long dead. But instead, he became the leader of a superpower. I don't think he regretted anything. The only thing he was afraid of was death. I know about his conversations with Proskrevichev and other close associates. He spoke about death often and was terrified of it. Usually, old people don't fear death, but this man, who was like a god on earth, did not want to go from this world into the next. He felt he should be allowed to lead forever, yet all earth-bound gods remain mortal.
Stalin died on March 5, 1953. Pravda reported, "The heart of our brother in arms has stopped beating." Lenin's successor, the wise leader and teacher of the Communist Party and the Soviet people, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin. The masses mourned his passing. His political heirs thought of his legacy, the future, and the party. Only 2 days after his funeral, Pravda quit publishing articles praising Stalin. Weeks later, his name was barely mentioned officially. But accounts were only truly settled in 1956, 3 years after his death. In a secret speech to the 20th Party Congress, Khrushchev cursed the dead leader as a bad Leninist, an egomaniac, and a sadistic killer of good communists. The glorious Communist Party refused to admit being a participant in Stalin's crimes. The good name of the party had to be protected. And yet even Stalin's successors would have had a difficult time distancing themselves from the legacy of Stalinism until Mikhail Gorbachev.
Я еще раз хотел повторить мысль, которую высказал раньше, что
I would just like to stress that the leader does not drive the system. The system drives the leader. Even a prominent leader such as Gorbachev, who will go down in history as an important figure, was a prisoner of this system and could not change it. Basically, he too thought like the system. Only gradually, step by step, did he move beyond this mentality and help the country free itself from its Bolshevik chains. We have to assume that Gorbachev knew about the crimes at Katyn, but he could not speak about it publicly. He lacked the courage because the system would not allow it. Gorbachev also knew that a Soviet invasion of Poland had been planned in 1981 before the Polish communists declared martial law. I myself took part in the planning, including an attack on Poland. But Gorbachev did not dare speak about it publicly. As I said, he lacked the strength and the courage to tell it like it was. Gorbachev was a cog in the system. He was fully aware, and it tormented him, but he was not in a position to throw off totalitarianism.
The party leadership agreed to display Stalin's corpse alongside Lenin's in the mausoleum on Red Square. On the day of the funeral, March 9, 1953, people in the socialist countries were urged by their governments to remember the dead leader. In 1961, Stalin's embalmed body was removed and buried in the Kremlin wall alongside other Soviet dignitaries. This remained uncontroversial until the collapse of the Soviet Union.